hammerhead's mouth was jagged as a knife wound. The ghostly form of the shark pressed itself against the wall of the glass tank, oblivious to the thrum of the generators and the pellucid light that dappled its pale flesh. Shadows moved like living things, leaping and sloping over the oppressively low ceiling and concrete walls of the aquarium. Lucifer Box was dead tired. He thrust 2 more benzodrine tablets into his mouth, stepped closer to the creature's enclosure, and watched his reflection balloon as though glimpsed in a fairground mirror. A step back, and the reality snapped into focus. A tall, slim, saturnine figure in the clinging form of the Zeba Gorman wetsuit. The damp black hair scraped off the forehead, the cruel blue eyes dilated by the queasy gloom. Stealthy as a cat, Box moved on, leaving wet footprints on the concrete. Damn her! Damn the blasted girl! If it hadn't been for Stiletto, he'd be out of Hong Kong now, settling down on the Cathay Pacific out of Kai Tak, downing his 3rd single malt, looking forward to dear old rain-swept England and getting away, far away, from the sweaty horror that had been the search for Gottfried Clawhammer. As for Stiletto, Clawhammer's mistress, Box recalled the moment he'd first seen her, blindingly beautiful, clad only in an ivory-coloured bathing costume, lying prone on the deck of the Beguine. As the yacht bobbed at anchor, his eyes had devoured her. The long, lissom legs, the proud mound of the bikini, the perfect breasts in their pearly cups. Shaking his head, he tried to clear the image of Stiletto from his mind. Damn the silly bitch! She'd get such a spanking when all this was over. But first they had to get out of there alive. And his plan? There was none. Box turned a corner, and what he saw made his flesh crawl. Yet another huge glass tank stood before him. Within, submerged and bound hand and foot, stood Stiletto. Big lead weights were roped about her waist, her feet firmly anchored to the white sand that lined the bottom of the tank. The girl's turquoise eyes bulged with fright behind a diving mask, the ugly rubber mouthpiece of an aqualung clamped between the perfect O of her lips. She saw Box and tried to move, sending a stream of air bubbles rocketing to the surface. Then there was the sound of a distant lever being pulled. Something whooshed down a concealed chute, hitting the water like a bullet, and there was a sudden flurry of movement in the tank. A flash in the water, bright as silver, then a wall of glittering shape soon resolved into the ugly gunmetal grey of a shoal of fish. Piranha! With a throb of nausea, Box saw the first of the deadly creatures taking an exploratory nibble at the girl's exposed white wrist. In one smooth movement, he unholstered his Beretta, took aim, and fired. The plate glass shattered with a massive percussion. Gallons of water vomited through the gaping hole, sending the piranha flapping and gasping into the fetid air. Stiletto collapsed at once, and Box rocketed forward, using the gun to smash at the remaining glass and allowing him to climb into the tank. He held onto her tightly and ripped the rubber mask from her deathly pale face. For a moment, she looked unseeingly at him. Then she smiled. "Oh, Lucifer, I knew you would come. I knew you would save me. For now there is only us. I want you to love me, Lucifer Box. I want you to spank me. Love me and spank me. To love me as if I was a beast. The lowest beast in—" "Box! Box, old man, shake a leg." I opened my eyes wide and blinked once, twice. Bewildered, I glanced about. Olive-green walls, a hissing gas fire, a cabbagey smell like a school dormitory. There was a loud creak as I straightened in the chair, though whether it was the cracked lever or my hips, I'm not sure. I scowled at the portrait of the new queen gazing down from the wall, as though blaming her for puncturing my dreaming, my lurid dreaming, I have to say. There's no other word for it. "You shouldn't have let me drop off like that," I said. "Damned embarrassing, snoozing in someone else's office." "Seemed ashamed to wake you," grinned Alan Playfair. "You looked so peaceful. And who wouldn't get a little drowsy after a slap-up nosh like that?" I recalled with a shudder the wet lettuce and scalpel-thin ham that had passed for lunch. "Besides," Playfair went on, lighting his pipe and extinguishing the match in a couple of swift swoops, "well, you've earned a rest." "Oh, don't say that, for God's sake. Makes me sound venerable." Playfair laughed explosively, his pipe jutting upwards so that the bowl almost touched his nose. "That," he coughed, "you will never be. Monks are venerable, old love. Oxbridge dons, too, but a scoundrel like you, I think not." Alan Playfair was about 45, with a utilitarian face and a suit as badly cut as his salt and pepper hair. A dependable chap, solid, respectable, and about to replace me. Me. Lucifer Box. The man who'd prevented the revivified zombie of Captain Scott destroying New Zealand with his steam dreadnought, the Terra Nova. The man who'd pursued and destroyed Dr. Cassavalonis Fetch and Acronym, the anarcho-criminal retinue of nihilists, incendiarists and murderers. The man who'd come out of the Second World War covered in glory, and certain unmentionables, after preventing the Nazis from exploding a miniature purgative inside the Prime Minister's guts. I had risen to the top of my curious profession and was now officially Joshua Reynolds, President of the Royal Academy. Not the oh-so-respectable bastion of fine art you might be imagining, of course, but the front for Her Britannic Majesty's really, really Secret Service. My scandalous career had been quite a ride, but, like all good things, it had to come to an end. The Royal Academy was finally to be absorbed by the traditional MI6 mob, the Service, with their checkpoints and their microfilmed sex acts and their shabby little assassinations in rainy Czech alleyways. Playfair held up a hand. "Anyway, I'm in no rush, old love. You remember that. You have all the time in the world. What have you got on, anyway?" he asked. "I'm winding down gently." I shrugged. "Something down in Cape Town. A body. An old friend of mine, in point of fact. Looks like suicide. He drove his car into the bay." Playfair shook his head. "Oh, I am sorry." He got to his feet and buttoned his jacket. "Well, if you'll excuse me now, pleasure, as always, and I'm sure I'll see you again before you leave." "If you like." "Cheerio, old love." He took my hand and then glanced down at the desk, his attention already elsewhere. For all his bonhomie, I had been effectively dismissed. I went through into the outer office, a smaller, darker, cooler version of Playfair's. Miss Beveridge looked up from her desk and smiled. Ah, Miss Beveridge. Charming girl, carrying out her Sherpa-like duties for the service without a word of complaint. I'd always noticed her long, lovely neck, startlingly brown against the crisp white of her lace collar, the way her eyes disappeared into crinkled half-moons when she smiled, her infectious and frankly dirty Lancastrian chuckle. In addition, having studied dusty files of my adventures in her youth, she was a dedicated fan. Perhaps, over a Madeira or four, I could immerse myself in a very different Beveridge report. The young lad's here, sir," she said brightly. "Oh, is he? Right. Thank you, Beveridge." As I moved to the door, she looked up again. "Sir, I just wanted to say, good luck, sir, and, well, it won't be the same without you." "Thanks." I felt suddenly emboldened. I was wondering, I have an appointment tomorrow, rather a depressing matter, I'm afraid. Funeral, old friend." "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, sir." "Well, I was wondering whether you'd be available to accompany me. I hate to go to these things alone. Then perhaps a spot of lunch, and I can regale you with tales of some of my more sensational past glories." To my delight, the girl's face lit up. "Oh, that'll be grand, Mr. Box. I can drive us there if you like." "Splendid." And, with as much insouciance as I could muster, I left the office and made my way down the peeling stairwell, grinning like a youngster and positively dancing on air. Awaiting me at the entrance was a little boy. He was sitting on a bench, legs sticking out before him like two white poles in neat grey socks. He looked up as I approached, but didn't smile. "Good afternoon, Christmas," I sighed.
"Hello, Daddy."
The Scouting Association has never held much appeal for me. I've no truck with paramilitary organisations. However, my son, Christmas, had taken to scouting with almost indecent fervour and was forever knotting sheepshanks, sparking up campfires, and shinning up those ropes with waxy ends you find dangling in chilly school gymnasia. He'd done so well, indeed, that he was to participate in some sort of international camp, and it was my duty on that sultry afternoon to set him on his way. Christmas box. You didn't see that one coming, did you? The product of too much Montrachet and a broken axle on the road to Zagreb, he was an indiscretion that didn't even have the excuse of being youthful. I'd done the decent thing for once in my life and given the brat my name, plus another in honour of the season. The Zagrebian temptress, you see, had deposited him on my doorstep one Yuletide Eve. Then I'd packed him off to some ancient boarding school for his betterment. On high days and holidays, I was obliged to take him out for an airing. Like his mother, the little squib had an unhealthy interest in outdoor pursuits, and so, somewhat reluctantly, I had enrolled the lad in the Scouts. Well, that's not strictly accurate, for with national service winding down and teddy boys slashing up the upholstery in crumbling picture houses, the Dib-Dib-Dibbers had been reborn as the grandly titled New Scout Movement. Its honorary chairman was the much-loved Lord Battenberg, and it was a real force for good, according to the Daily Mail, which is rarely a happy sign. For some unfathomable reason, the whole summer knees-up was set to kick off on one of those queer little islands that squat in the outer reaches of the Thames. Christmas and I motored through town, and then headed south through Richmond until we came to a crumbling wooden footbridge that connected the mainland to the island. Beyond lay a broad meadow, dotted with pyramid-shaped tents and small wooden houses, jetties leading from each to the river. The pathway was overhung by weeping willows. From beneath one of them, a woman in a well-cut skirt and jacket suddenly appeared. I took in her steel spectacles and a heart-shaped face of alabaster loveliness. Lustrous burnt sienna curls hung to her shoulders. Only a tiny scar just above the mouth marred the perfection. The newcomer extended a slim white hand. "Melissa Forethought," purred the stunner. "You must be Mr. Box, and here's my little Christmas." She planted a hand on top of the boy's beret, and he beamed up at her. "We're all thrilled and honoured to have such a clever young man as part of our team." Her green eyes widened. "You must be very proud." "Oh, bursting with it," I lied, "positively bursting." Miss Forethought pushed an errant curl from her face. I couldn't keep my eyes off the tiny pulse beating in her pale throat. She had the look of a girl I'd fox-trotted across the floor at Maxime's on Armistice Day 1918. What a night! The Germans hadn't been the only ones to surrender. We moved on down the path. All around the meadow, bell-shaped tents had been erected, and there was that pervasive grassy smell one associates with village fêtes and flower shows. Each tent swarmed with athletic-looking youngsters in khaki shorts and absurd sombrero-like hats. I was suddenly rather uncomfortably reminded of another youth group which had gained some little popularity in 30s Nuremberg. "You must forgive my ignorance," I said, stepping carefully over a guy rope, "but this camp of yours, what exactly goes on?" "You were never a scout, Mr. Box?" inquired Miss Forethought. I chuckled. "No, after your time, of course," she cut in. "What a shame." Tilting her head, she appraised me with a sort of pitying look that is the special preserve of youth. "You have funny names, don't you?" I said cheerily, for the wallers in charge of it all. "Something from Kipling, isn't it? The Mowgli, the Baloo." "Arkela." "That's the chap." I looked around. "Is he about?" Miss Forethought shook her head. "Not at present. We're very busy, as you can imagine." "Oh, quite," I said, "all that pop to uncork. So when does everyone arrive with the knees up?" Miss Forethought crossed her hands in front of her. "The jamboree begins next week. In Kingston." "Super," I said distractedly, imagining how disappointed all those foreign scouts would be with suburban little Kingston upon Thames. But no doubt gallons of ginger beer and pickled eggs would put them right. We were approaching a large dark hut, constructed from logs in that quaint fashion one associates with spa towns and skiing resorts. Inside, the place stank of damp. A long corridor stretched off immediately in front of us, the inset windows looking into cheaply panelled rooms. From the blur of white vests and navy blue pants within, it seemed the scouts were engaged in vigorous exercise. I was about to look away when I became aware that someone was watching us through one of the interior windows. It was a strange and sickly boy, hollow-eyed and jaundiced-looking, like the ghost of a Victorian child drowned in a weir. Limp yellow hair slimed its way across the pale forehead, and his arms and legs were pathetically shriveled in indigo pants and a startlingly white vest. He stared at me, unblinkingly, and I had the oddest feeling I'd seen him somewhere before. Then he was gone, swallowed up in the mass of vested youth tearing excitedly round the room.
"Can I go now?"
piped up Christmas. I glanced down and his face was shining with excitement. Well, if the little scrap wanted to volunteer for all this leaping about and frog spawn collecting, who was I to gainsay him? So I left the lad in the capable hands of Melissa Forethought and bade farewell to them both. By the time I'd reached the footbridge again, my mind was already focusing with delicious anticipation on my appointment next day with Miss Beveridge. Then, with a jolt, I reminded myself of the reason for our meeting: the internment of Christopher Miracle. The next morning at 11 o'clock precisely, the marvellous Miss B pulled up outside number 9 Downing Street in a black Triumph Mayflower that neatly complemented her jacket, skirt and nylons. Sporting a sombre Homburg on my snow-white locks, I clambered into the back of the car and we sped off through the suitably funereal rain. The journey took us about half an hour, most of it filled with Miss Beveridge's earthy laughter, as I delighted her with tales of some of my juicier exploits. What a find that girl was. We arrived at the cemetery and got out of the car. As I straightened the Windsor knot on my tie, the girl opened a large umbrella and, thrillingly, hooked her arm through mine. Then, together, we set off through the rain-sodden graveyard. There were only a handful of brolly-bearing mourners grouped round the churned-up red earth, their wizened faces rendered blank and emotionless by the surfeit of burying that comes with old age. I nodded to acquaintances, fellow survivors of a shattered generation. Unbidden, images flickered through my mind. That first meeting with Miracle at one of Maudie Risborough's Chelsea crushes back in the naughty 90s. I was the ingenue dauber, pale, skinny, almost innocent. Miracle was the lionized portraitist, glowing, strapping, beautiful. He could have demolished me and my fragile reputation with a single gesture or a well-placed bon mot. But he'd shown me such kindness that dizzying afternoon that we'd soon become firm friends. Then had come the Great War, the Franco-Swiss mission to L'Île du Diable, and the injuries from which that wonderful blonde boy had never wholly recovered. Miracle had drifted through his money and the years, not quite committing to anything. When last I'd seen him, he'd just taken over, in a desultory fashion, a business that manufactured fruit cordial. Then it had all come to an abrupt end, with Miracle's Jaguar XK120 tearing wildly through the streets of Cape Town before plunging into the Atlantic. Whatever could have made him do it? An unnecessarily ginger vicar droned through the usual eulogies and then clapped shut the soggy pages of his Bible. I tossed a posy of flowers into the grave, crimson roses for mourning, violets for modesty, sunflowers for loyalty, and baby's breath for love everlasting. Propped up against a nearby headstone was a rather ugly arrangement of blooms done up into the shape of a bottle of squash. The M for miracle trademark had been picked out in poppies. I noticed my gloves were smeared with wet mud, but Miss Beveridge was there in an instant, proffering a clean handkerchief. As I rubbed at the red stain, my gaze met that of a very fat man. He was perhaps 70 years, plum-purple, chewing rather noisily on something or other, and regarding his fellow mourners with what I can only describe as a sort of amused contempt. The features were somehow familiar, and I realised, as Miss Beveridge and I left the graveside, that this must be Miracle's brother, Quintin. Although we had only met once or twice, I felt compelled to offer the usual sentiments. The girl and I fell into step with him as he ambled towards the gated exit. "Mr. Miracle?" He turned a smiling moon face towards me.
I am he.
"I don't know if you remember me," I said. "My name's Lucifer Box." Liquid mud squelched onto my black shoes. "I was a friend of Christopher's."
I'm afraid I must get on.
"I wonder if I could speak to you," I said quickly, in private." He looked about as though hoping for a better offer, then shrugged.
Very well. It's slackening off, he noted, holding out a gloved hand and peering at the heavens. Shall we sit?
Quintin Miracle eased himself onto a bench and stared happily into space, chewing like a cow with its cud. His piggy eyes twinkled mischievously, and his hand darted into his trousers.
Can I tempt you with an all-sort?
Thank you, no, I said. He made a happy little noise.
You're lost, chum. Though, entre nous, I'm not so keen on the coconut ones. If I had my way, they'd do away with them and just have more licorice. Lovely black licorice, shiny as a beetle's back. The world could stand more licorice, don't you think, Mr.
Box?
Box, yes, I remember you now.
I'd like to speak to you about your brother, I said. Can you think of any reason why he would have wanted to take his own life?
The business with the motor car, you mean? None at all.
He smiled, and his teeth were streaked yellow-black.
Though he was never the same after the Somme, you know.
I looked down sadly. Yes, I do know.
Poor old Chris. Always had the looks, of course. Mamma's golden boy.
Was there a trace of bitterness in the younger Miracle's tone?
Suppose she just couldn't face it.
Face what?
Getting decrepit and ugly. But what's the alternative, eh? That's what I always say. Funny thing is, he continued, he'd seemed so much more full of life lately. Got quite interested in his business. Mind you, that hadn't been going so well of late, the orange squash lark.
No?
No, some sort of boardroom battle, a takeover bid.
Really? I asked, intrigued. By whom?
Search me,
said Quintin, winding a licorice bootlace round his fat finger and nibbling on the end.
Last letter I got from Chris mentioned it. He sounded a bit down in the dumps. They were offering more and more loot, but he didn't want to sell. Shareholders thought differently. Perhaps that explains why he did what he did.
Perhaps, though he never seemed the type.
Type?
To take his own life. Miracle's brother grunted.
Well, Mr. Box, I suppose they never do.
I rose and smoothed down my trousers. Thanks very much for your time, and again, my condolences. Miss Beveridge was standing a little way off. I joined her, and we walked towards the car.
Find out what you wanted, sir?
She asked. Not really, I shrugged. Perhaps I'm reading too much into my friend's death. This was very kind of you, by the way, bringing me here.
Not at all, Mr. Box.
Please, I said, call me Lucifer. Miss Beveridge flushed slightly.
Oh, no, sir, I couldn't possibly do that.
Why ever not?
Oh, be right, sir. I mean, you being who you are and all.
I laughed and adjusted my damp hat. That tingling anticipation was rising within me again. I was recently complaining to Mr. Playfair that I have no wish to become venerable. What's your name? Christian name, I mean.
Coral.
I stopped and held out my hand. "Hello, Coral." She gave a nervous laugh and shook it.
"Hello, Lucifer."
"See?" I said, walking on. "That wasn't so hard, was it? Now then, my glittering career. Where had we got to?" Coral Beveridge's face became suddenly animated, like a child asking for her favourite bedtime story.
Dr. Fetch! Dr. Fetch!" she said excitedly.
"Ah, now you're talking. Dr. Casavolonus Fetch, the man with the celluloid hand. He formed acronym around the turn of the century when I was in my full vigour, and you, my dear Coral, were no more than the first gleam of a twinkle. Fetch and I crossed swords many a time back in the good old days."
How did he lose the hand?" she asked wonderingly.
I chuckled. Well, I could laugh about it now, although it was rather serious at the time. Fetch dressed himself up as a woman and infiltrated the suffragist movement. His intention was to go one better than Mrs. Pankhurst and throw a horse under the king.
"Flippin' heck."
Audacious scheme, would have worked, but
for you, sir."
I smiled. My God, I haven't thought about Fetch in years.
"You almost sound as if you miss him,"
she noted. Perhaps I do. Those were glorious days. Best of my life, really. I shivered, though not through cold, feeling glad to put the cemetery behind me. We had reached the car, and Miss Beveridge held the door open for me. "Now then," I murmured, placing a gloved hand over hers, "how about that lunch?" She looked at my hand on hers and said, "Oh." Then she glanced down quickly at her shoes. No, thank you, sir. I think I'd better be getting home." I withdrew my hand as though scorched. "Coral, I'm so sorry. I thought perhaps you and I—" And now she looked me full in the face and laughed. The delicious tingle of anticipation began to disperse. My face fell. "I thought you might be keen to, you seemed as if you might want to."
"Oh, I'm right keen on that," she blurted out. "But you're too old for me, sir. Oh, don't bear thinking about."
By the evening, the rain had stopped. The muggy atmosphere, however, continued. Somewhat knocked back by Miss Beveridge's brutal rejection, I clambered into the Bentley and drove up to town in search of oblivion. Soho thrummed like a wire across a drum, reeking of camphor from summer clothes, with the sizzle of neon cafe signs and the scents of expectation, tobacco, coffee, sweat, sex. In Dean Street I drove past narrow entranceways as quaint as Eastbourne beach huts. In most, below stuttering red lamps, hovered ghostly whores. As I went by, the girls drifted in and out like figures on a weather house, and fugitive memories sprang up unbidden. How gaily I had trawled these same streets as a young man, a raffish De Quincey, my scarlet-lined opera cloak shielding each of my couplings as completely as the veil of the night itself. Halting at a zebra crossing, I glanced over my shoulder, and the image thrown back in a tobacconist's window, an old man hunched over a steering wheel, banished all such nostalgia. I shook my head. Throwing the car briskly into first, I dodged the traffic of Oxford Street and headed for the fabled Blood Orange. 3 stories tall, the club staggered between a pair of more respectable buildings like a drunk between 2 coppers. In its 20s heyday, it had been the epitome of glamour. Now, in its dotage, it had a seedy appeal all of its own. I parked the car in a cobbled mews that stank of last night's relief, then went up worn steps into a kind of vestibule. A tiny asthmatic lift took me up 2 floors and decanted me into a big, dark room, every available surface covered with shards of broken mirror, grotesquely reflecting the heaving mass of jabbering, laughing faces. Incongruously, a Boy Scout, I couldn't seem to get away from them at present, was wandering from table to table with a collecting tin. I headed for the curved bar, where a big man with a neck like a block of ice cream was forcing flat champagne onto a sad-eyed girl in her mother's furs, whilst two skinny queens in evening dress hooted at each other, their wolfish features shattered, split, and reflected in the mirrored walls. I knew them all, loved and loathed the pack of them. Such was the blood orange. However, at one of the tables sat a stranger, an insignificant-looking bald man with little puffs of white hair sprouting from behind each ear. His white silk scarf had twisted up the points of his collar to give him an incongruously Pickwickian air. Leaning like a question mark against the wall right by him was a young black man. Toreador slim in skinny suit and tie, his glossy black hair was cut in a ruler-straight fringe, and acid-green socks showed over his winkle-pickers. He watched the Pickwickian from under sleepy eyelids. Dismissing them both from my mind, I walked up to the bar where stood, presiding over this whole carnival of damnation, a colossal female in canary yellow. Just then she was knocking back a pint of dog's nose and pulling a flap of skirt out of the cheeks of her buttocks. My dear servant Delilah was now as old as the hills and as white-haired as I, but age had not withered her, and when fortune had finally come my way, I had granted her freedom from domestic service. With her savings she had bought the leasehold on the crumbling blood orange, and the rest, as they say, is hysteria.
"Mr. Fox!"
she cackled when she saw me approach.
"Oh, what a sight for sore uns! Get sat down, I'll fetch you some plonk."
So, how's business?" I inquired.
"Oh, same as ever,"
she growled, sloshing cognac into a none-too-clean tumbler.
"I got to read the Riot Act 3 times a week just to keep the buggers in order. Mind you, some might say as we've gone up in the world."
She nodded towards the fluffy-haired Pickwick-like fellow I'd noticed earlier. The handsome youth was now sitting with him, and they seemed to be having a fairly lively conversation. The older man was looking nervously about and nibbling at his fingernails.
"You know who that is?"
asked Delilah.
"The old geezer."
I feel I should, I admitted, but I'm not as good with faces as once I was.
"Sir Vivian Hoopla,"
breathed Delilah.
"Remember him?"
"Oh, yes, of course. Used to be Secretary of State. No, he was head of the Board of Health. Wasn't he under Asquith?" Delilah shrugged hugely.
"I just remember him from the picture papers. Nearly got the top job, didn't he?"
I nodded, intrigued. Yes, he did. And indeed it was Hoopla. Pinched and mean-spirited by reputation, he was a pillar supporting wall and front porch of the establishment. And yet there he was, sat at one of Delilah's chipped tables, apparently in search of oblivion, like me.
"What you been up to, sir?"
asked Delilah, a mischievous twinkle in her bloodshot orbits.
"Hoping some kiddies across the road? Opening a new hospital ward? Or have you been going down to the park to chuck Ovis at the ducks?"
Now, Delilah," I said, sipping gingerly at the brandy, "you're sounding petulant again."
"Well," she drawled, "not like the old days, is it? Stuck behind a desk fiddling with paper clips. I bet you give a year of your life just for a nice juicy assassination."
I shook my head. "Time to bring down the curtain, Delilah," I said. "The party's over." But scarcely had the words left my lips when I felt a sudden heat on my cheek, and my smeary glass exploded as a 9mm bullet slammed into the bar. I flung myself to the floorboards. In a ring of suddenly empty tables stood Sir Vivian Hoopla, brandishing a Luger. His ruddy face was suffused with a wicked grin, and the clouds of hair behind his ears seemed to stand on end. He fired again, further fracturing the mirrored walls. The slender young man shielded his head with his long, slim fingers.
"Look out! Look out!"
cackled Sir Vivian, delightedly loosing off another shot.
"Never fired a weapon before, you see. Sat out the war of my silly old rump. Both wars, in point of fact. But now, now I'll take on the lot of you."
All right, mate, growled Delilah, rolling up her sleeves and approaching stealthily. Time you turned in.
Not likely,
yelled Hoopla, and galloped off through the crowd to the lift. He dragged back the grill and turned to face the room, a manic glitter in his eyes.
See, he piped. I'm a match for you all.
The Luger spat fire into the smoky air, and the great central chandelier splintered, showering crystal droplets like frozen tears. Then the lift chugged into life, and Hoopla was gone. "Stairs!" I cried, scrambling to my feet. "Get to the stairs!" Delilah and I tore from the room and clattered down 2 flights, flung open the front door and dashed outside, only to be greeted by the roar of an engine and a great screech of tires. I gaped at Delilah. "He's stolen my ruddy car!" Delilah heaved a huge sigh, shoulders sagging in defeat.
Come on, then. I'll call the Rosses.
I looked round swiftly, and my heart leapt as I caught sight of a moped parked opposite. "Forget the Rosses," I cried. "You said you wanted to recapture the halcyon days, you old fossil. Come on!" We dashed across to the moped, our hips clicking like knitting needles. A groan of effort, and I swung my leg across the broad back of the machine. Delilah did likewise behind me, and the poor vehicle sagged under the weight. I chugged the engine into life, and belching fumes, we screeched off into the traffic in pursuit of my Bentley. I peered ahead at the silvery car bumpers as we shot across Oxford Street and back into Soho. "What the hell can have got into the old fool?" I yelled.
Maybe he's cracked, cried Delilah. Pressure of work.
I shook my head. No, he's been retired for years. In any case, I'm sure of... Look out! Ahead, manoeuvring through the traffic with terrifying disregard, was the Bentley.
What was you going to say?
Cried Delilah. I crouched low over the handlebars. Tell you later. There was a fanfare of protesting horns as Hoopla smashed into Berwick Street. A mass of gabardine punters fled as the car screamed past them. Then suddenly, dozens of covered market stalls blocked his way. Hoopla slammed on the Bentley's brakes. I could see the top of his bald head shining in the electric light as he considered his next move. Suddenly he revved the engine, and the car leapfrogged forward, ploughing into the stalls and sending shattered planks, fruit and vegetables spuming into the air. There was a sickening crunch as Hoopla sliced my beloved Bentley through the last of the stalls and, in a plume of exhaust smoke, zigzagged towards Shaftesbury Avenue. "Hoopla!" I cried desperately. "Sir Vivian, get out of the car before you kill someone!"
"I must get on,"
whooped Hoopla.
"No time to lose. Can't you see? Can't you see what happened? It's a bloody miracle."
Suddenly a stretch of clear road opened, leading with dreadful inevitability to Piccadilly Circus and the statue of Eros. Hoopla took immediate advantage and opened up the Bentley's throttle, steering the car down the very centre of the carriageway. Then he attempted a right turn, and suddenly the car was on 2 wheels, smacking onto the pavement and heading for the famous statue. In a blur, the motor flipped over and slammed sidelong into Eros with a devastating percussion. Hoopla was hurled through the windscreen onto the steps beneath the statue. As though in sympathy, Eros sagged as the masonry crumbled beneath him, arrow now aimed downwards as if to pierce the old man's heart. I screeched the moped to a halt, and Delilah and I stumbled unsteadily towards the scene of the accident. A thin trickle of blood was dribbling from Hoopla's lips onto the starched ends of his wing collar. I bent down and wiped the blood from his face. "Sir Vivian," I whispered urgently, "for God's sake, what happened to you?"
"Wonderful," he murmured. "Wonderful."
Then the old fellow began to chuckle gently and, struggling to get his breath, whispered,
"Le papillon noir."
"What?" But Hoopla's eyes had closed. A broad smile spread over his blood-soaked face, and he was gone. Delilah shook her massive head.
Bloody odd. I've never seen anyone act like that before.
With an effort, I straightened up. "I have," I said. From close by I heard the wail of a police siren and looked round. To my surprise, in amongst the ogling crowd was the young man from the Blood Orange. Girl slim, fingers bright with rings, he gazed at me from behind the geometrically straight fall of his black hair. Then he was gone. melting into the crowd. Travel, though it broadens the mind, narrows life expectancy. The positive benefits of each lovely foreign vista, every restful sail down the Blue Nile, are offset by the hateful tyranny of actually getting there. The cramped train, the soulless airport, the dreadful people, and perhaps worst of all, carrying one's own luggage. Whatever became of bearers? Athens airport wore the familiar bleary look of an early hour's arrival, stale with sweat and tobacco. A handful of uniformed officials shuffled about the shoddy buildings, staring sullenly at us newcomers. I was keeping the black youth in sight. He was some way behind me, head buried in a well-thumbed paperback. He'd leapt into a cab at Piccadilly, which I'd followed on my borrowed moped all the way to London Airport, and from there to Athens. Outside the Greek terminal, the air was sharp, the darkening sky cobalt as a ceramic tile and crammed with stars. I lit a cigarette, hailed a cab, and then sat in the back, ignoring the jabbering driver as I waited for the mysterious youth to emerge. At last he did so, shouldering his bag and getting into a cab of his own. We followed him through cramped, dingy streets overhung with sagging cables like stitches on burst wounds, until he reached the dimly lit railway station. A big, elderly-looking train was already at the platform, huffing as though impatient. I checked the departures board. The train was heading for Istanbul. In 5 minutes. The slender youth swung open a door, took a swift look around, and then disappeared inside the train. I paid off my driver and walked quickly to the telegraph office. I knew of someone in Istanbul who might prove very useful. With moments to spare, I pulled myself up onto the train, feeling a little thrill of anticipation as I settled down into a private cabin. The engine lurched, the giant wheels squealed, and the journey east began. I lay back on my cool white pillow and let my buzzing thoughts settle into some kind of order. As I had remarked to Delilah, the crazed behaviour of Sir Vivian Hoopla was not entirely unfamiliar to me. Bells had rung. Distant ones, but they'd rung all the same. Just 12 months ago, Sir Douglas Go-Between, another former cabinet minister, had broken his neck after falling out of an apple tree. When questioned about his behaviour, his grieving wife could only say that he'd woken up that morning determined to go scrumping. Then there'd been Baroness Watchbell, the elderly pharmacist who, not long after Go-Between's demise, had strapped herself to the wing of a Cessna bobcat and collided with a mountain. Then there was Père Medlar, the French cleric, whose work on the immune system had brought him the Nobel Prize. Happily celibate for years, he had suddenly, at the age of 80, taken himself off to Marrakesh and died in a fit of sexual excess involving 38 boys and a Barbary macaque. The question was, had these silly old buffers just got it into their heads to have one last hurrah before the graveyard, or were their deaths connected? And was Christopher Miracle's so-called suicide part of the same bizarre pattern? Then there were Hoopla's dying words. Le papillon noir, the black butterfly. A strange picture was forming, made all the more strange by the presence, both at Hoopla's table and the scene of the accident, of the mysterious young man. It wasn't much of a lead, but it was all I had. Next morning, I breakfasted in the dining car. I was just reaching for my second coffee when suddenly I became aware of another presence in the otherwise empty carriage. He was standing by the door, willowy tall in a cut-throat crease suit, black roll-neck sweater and sunglasses over which hung his dead-straight hair. "This he taken?" he fluted. The accent was curious, faintly American. I shook my head. Without a word, my quarry slipped into the empty place, and I felt his warm leg brush my knee. Then he smiled, showing perfect white teeth. Cigarette? He asked. Thank you, no, I said, patting my side. I have my own. Oh, no, baby. I meant, do you have a cigarette? For me. Oh, I cried. Oh, of course. Fumbling in my jacket, I produced my battered old silver case. He took out a Turkish mixture and held it between his long, slim fingers. I proffered my lighter, then lit a cigarette for myself, and fixed the youth with a hard stare. Well, this is a pleasant surprise, Mr. He chuckled, and the sound was curiously pretty, like the song of a bird. Names are very powerful things, baby. If you knew who I was, you might go telling tales out of school. Why ever would I do that? I smiled. However, I have no qualms about introducing myself. My name is... Oh, I know who you are, he murmured, sliding the sunglasses down the bridge of his nose, eyes glittering like Whitby jet beneath the sculpted hoods of their lids. I know all about you, Mr. Lucifer Box. You were good. Was I? You might even have been the very best, but there comes a time when you should retire from the field with some grace. Just wouldn't be right for you to end it all out here. Time's up. Tick-tock, baby. Tick-tock. I folded my arms. How kind of you to be concerned for my welfare and for elucidating matters. Huh? Well, I wasn't sure whether I was on a wild goose chase. Now I know I'm not. He threw back his head and giggled, slapping a long brown hand against his chest. Good point. Whoops. I felt a sudden warmth on my leg and realized with an electric thrill that he had slipped off his shoe and lain his bare foot against the flesh of my ankle. But seriously, baby, he cooed, why don't you get off the train at the next station? Beautiful country around here. You could see the sights. Take it easy. His foot was moving slowly, lazily, up my calf, over my knee. Easy, he breathed. Nice and easy. This isn't work for old men. In an instant, my hand dived under the table and grabbed his ankle. With the other, I took hold of his big toe and bent it back savagely. He gasped in shock and pain and dropped his cigarette. Just who are you? I demanded. He twisted in his seat and I jerked his toe back still further. Name, I insisted. Kingdom, he croaked at last. Kingdom come. I let his foot go at once, and he pulled it back like a whip. Damn you, he cried. No call for that. I picked up my coffee and swirled it around the cup. So, Kingdom, I may call you Kingdom, mayn't I? It seems you know all about me, but I know next to nothing about you. That strikes me as a very unfair arrangement. Life's unfair, baby, he snarled, massaging his bruised toe. I fixed him with a level stare, blue eyes to brown. Really? How's yours been? And how does Sir Vivian Hoopla fit into it? You two were having a very animated chat last night in the Blood Orange. In a flash, there was a long, thin, deadly blade at my throat. I could slit you open like a blowfish, baby, Kingdom Come said with deadly gravity. No one touches me, not without my say-so. I swallowed and grinned foolishly. I have terrible manners. I always forget to ask nicely when I'm torturing people. The boy's face suddenly relaxed and he giggled again. The knife vanished up the expensively cut sleeve as suddenly as it had appeared. Well, let's call this a warning, he said lightly. A nice, friendly warning, Mr. Lucifer Box. He rose like a wisp of smoke and gave me a graceful bow as he headed for the door. It's been an honor, sir, I mean that. But I do hope we shan't meet again. Next time I might not be so friendly. That evening, Istanbul announced itself with the achingly mournful call to prayer. I left the train and looked around for Kingdom Come. There was, of course, no sign. I could only hope that, if my contact in the city were half as good as his reputation promised, I would soon be back on the boy's trail. There was a reply waiting for me at the telegraph office, welcoming me to the city and giving the address of an hotel into which my contact had booked me. It was one of those cosy places constructed in the old colonial style. A beaming concierge and a comical fez showed me to my room, where I bathed luxuriously and surrendered my suit to be laundered. Then I stretched out for a welcome 40 winks before my evening appointment. The night was very warm. Little blocks of charcoal burned brightly in swinging lamps outside shut-up shops. Clothes freshly laundered, I made my way up a stone stair and found myself on a raised concrete platform on which sprouted half a dozen cafes. I walked on until I came to the third cafe, parted a thin muslin curtain, and went inside. A great rolling fug of tobacco smoke billowed overhead. I sat down at a hexagonal table and ordered a glass of coffee and honey and nut sweetmeats. Both were utterly delicious, the coffee glutinous. Lighting a cigarette, I leaned back against the brickwork and let the scene wash over me. Lord, I'd missed Istanbul. I hadn't been there since the early days of the Franco-British occupation, when I'd been tracking down the spy known only as Rosehip, the best belly dancer in old Stamboul, who dusted her nipples with icing sugar in imitation of the snow-covered domes of the Topkapi. Happy days. Glancing at my wristwatch, I turned as the muslin curtain parted, and a huge man pushed his way inside. He plonked himself down at the table next to mine and barked at the boy to fetch him a pipe. He was like a bear in white linen, the swarthy face bisected by a drooping black moustache. 2 gold rings sparkled in one ear. I noticed that the tip of the ear was ragged, as though it had been bitten off. He glanced towards me, and I saw that, though one eye gleamed darkly, the other was missing, replaced by a gold sovereign that had been screwed into the socket. It blazed briefly in the light, leaving the after-image of dear dead George V on my startled retina. At length he withdrew the mouthpiece of the water pipe and swivelled in my direction.
"I like your shoes, Pat."
"Thanks. I prefer brogues," I replied.
"But only from churches."
The silly code words exchanged, he moved sideways over the cushions and gripped my hand with his massive paw.
"All right, Hinny," he grinned. "You must be Lucifer Box. I've heard a lot about you, like."
"Whitley Bay?" I ventured.
"None other,"
he cackled.
"Do you fancy a drink?"
Bay was an old contact of Delilah's, and though we'd never actually met, his reputation preceded him. Whilst maintaining a respectable public facade as a university professor, he was the secret leader of a cadre of psychoanalysts come mercenaries known as the Young Turks. Their speciality lay in imagining themselves into the minds of the enemy, and then working out, through analysis, what their next move would be. If this failed, they fell back on good old-fashioned Balkan brutality. It was a potent combination, and the Young Turks were feared and respected as a result.
"So,"
said Bay,
"how can I help?"
I quickly told him about the queer deaths of the elderly dignitaries, Hoopla's accident, and Kingdom Come's threats on the train. "Oh, there's one more thing. Hoopla said something as he was dying. Le papillon noir. Mean anything to you?" Bay's one good eye widened, stretching the dark skin around the sovereign.
"You interest me, Mr. Box," he said at last. "You interest me very much."
I drank some wine. "How so?"
"Stuff floods through this place,"
said Whitley Bay, folding his trunk-like arms.
"It's a gateway to the west, just like it's always been. Once it was spice, then heroin from Afghan poppies."
"And now?"
"We've been picking up whispers," he said. "Not much."
"A drug?" Whitley Bay nodded.
"Black butterfly. It's a new one on me, like."
"Me too," I said. "So what does it do? Do you know?" Whitley shrugged.
That's what I hope we'll find out tomorrow at the Hagia Sophia. We've got a contact on the inside.
The inside of the mosque?
The inside of the organisation. We reckon the pillars are made up in a part of the city called Beoglu. It's north of the Golden Horn. Nice area. Dead posh back in the day. Our contact has only given us a few hints, but me lads and I have pieced it together, and we reckon that's the base of their operations.
He stretched and broke wind explosively.
Anyway, he said, you must be knackered. I'll call for you at 9, though them buggers in the minarets will have you up well before that.
I was up and out early next morning, but the famous Istanbul Bazaar was already active, heavy with the delicious scents of roasting meat and spices. Then Whitley Bay emerged from the crowd, greeting me with a thump on the back that set my teeth rattling.
"Sleep all right, Sparrowshanks?"
he asked, scooping a handful of green figs from a nearby basket. The pale sun sparkled off his sovereign eye, giving him a white-gold wink. "Not bad," I said. In truth, I had not slept well at all, my mind buzzing with speculations and my fitful dreams haunted by the slim, dangerous figure of Kingdom Come. We found ourselves walking slowly down a narrow alley towards the Hagia Sophia. "You'll forgive me for asking," I said to Whitley, "but you don't sound like a local man." He laughed explosively and shreds of fig flew from his teeth.
Me mum, she was Turkish, but me dad was from South Shields, a brickie. He come out here looking for adventure. Didn't find much, mind, just more bricklaying. And me mum. Then we all moved back to England till I was 15.
"I suppose you found all the adventure your father lacked," I said.
"Oh, hell aye. Never a dull moment,"
cackled the big man. "And this black butterfly contact of yours, you've met them before?" But Whitley's contact, it seemed, was something of an enigma. The meeting in the silvery-domed Byzantine wonder was to be the first physical contact between the two parties. And now the Hagia Sophia, at various times both mosque and church, loomed before us, its spindly minarets rising like rockets into the clear blue sky. We merged with the crowd of tourists and crossed through the arched entrance. "This contact, then," I said, "what does he look like?"
"He'll make himself known," intoned Whitley.
I glanced over his huge shoulder as a knot of tourists began to ascend the stone stairway to the building's next level. Vulgarly dressed Germans, a lone blonde boy in a red jumper with his back to me, Americans with shopping bags and cameras. Was our contact among them? Whitley's good eye swiveled round as he checked his wristwatch.
"Thee late. Seen any likely candidates?"
I shook my head. "I'll go up a level, have a look around." I was panting by the time I reached the next floor. I crossed through the cool shadows to an ornate black balcony and looked down. Behind me, tourists began to cluster, laughing and daring each other to peek over the side. Far below, footsteps echoed hollowly off the marble. Whitley Bay was where I'd left him, leaning casually against a pillar and smoking. Suddenly a woman, tall, blonde, and wearing a belted mackintosh, detached herself from a corner and crossed the floor. She was heading towards Whitley Bay. I leaned over a little too far and felt a sudden vertigo. In the same instant, I noticed another figure behind a pillar, whippet thin in a charcoal suit and sunglasses. His dead straight fringe seemed to cleave his smooth face in two. Kingdom Come again. My pulse quickened. The boy flattened himself against the stonework and pulled a pistol from his jacket. There was a soft tim. A gory hole appeared in the blonde woman's forehead, and she collapsed to the floor. Kingdom Come was beating a hasty retreat. "Him!" I croaked. "After him!" I watched Whitley Bay lumber off in pursuit, but his progress was hampered by the sea of haversacks and cameras, tourists and attendants that was already washing over the dead body of the woman in the mackintosh. I staggered breathlessly downstairs and joined him outside, just in time to see Kingdom Come dive into a taxi that roared off in a cloud of mustard-coloured dust. "Brilliant!" I snapped. "Our only contact murdered before our eyes." Whitley ran a finger under his tight collar.
"The Black Butterfly people must have cottoned onto her, sent the lad to knock her off before she could spill the beans. What now?"
I sighed, narrowing my eyes. "Well, they know we're onto them. They might well be preparing to up sticks." Whitley nodded. Sweat ran down his leathery forehead.
"My thoughts exactly, pet lamb. I reckon we should hit the base at Beoglu. Hit it hard, and tonight."
"No," I said. "I'm going in alone. Give me an hour, and then come in all guns blazing. Deal?" He shook his great head.
"Hey, your funeral, Sparrowshanks, but you're the boss."
"Yes," I said, smiling. "I am." Dusk was settling over the city as we drove out to the neglected park in the Beoglu district. The fort-like entrance was a strange, disquieting sort of place, its brown bricks flat as biblical loaves, the ragged walls serrated like teeth. Whitley and I got out of the car and I glanced up. Kestrels were wheeling in the indigo sky, keening, cheeping. "Me lads will be here in 1 hour," said Whitley softly. I moved swiftly towards the track that led up to the entrance. The interior of the fort was little more than rubble. At the back of the structure, trees that twisted like unset limbs formed an arched opening to the woodland beyond, rather like a stage set. I passed through, and almost at once, silence swamped me. Suddenly I emerged into a clearing. Starkly lit by arc lamps, there stood a complex of steel buildings, enclosed on all sides by high wire mesh. There were huge tanks, like gasometers, dotted around the perimeter, each labelled with a skull and crossbones. As I watched, automatic steel doors shushed open, and figures in white laboratory coats glided in and out. I looked at the hands of my Girard Perregaux watch. 15 minutes of my precious hour already gone. Time to employ some special equipment. I unbuckled my belt and, using the tiny hacksaw blade concealed within, made short work of the fence. I raced to the nearest wall and flattened myself against it just in time as a searchlight beam swept by, illuminating the path where I'd stood. I shuffled along until, around the next corner, I found what I was looking for. A large truck was parked outside, its rear end open, and a forklift busily unloading large pallets. A man with a clipboard was supervising. As well as the regulation lab coat, he was sporting a kind of gas mask, presumably as defense against whatever toxic substance was contained in the tanks. The forklift suddenly gave an unhealthy sort of rattle, stalled, and rolled backwards, upsetting the pallet that was balanced on its twin prongs and scattering what looked like aspirin pills all over the dusty yard. Pills. Was this Black Butterfly? The gas-masked supervisor immediately threw up his hands in horror. He wrenched open the truck's cabin door and berated the driver in a stream of incomprehensible oaths. The driver shrugged. The supervisor sighed heavily, stepped back into the shadows to make a note on his clipboard, and then made a high, surprised, gurgling sound as my arm snaked round his neck and squeezed him into unconsciousness. In moments, I reappeared, holding the clipboard and adjusting the mask over my white hair. I made a rude gesture to the forklift driver, and then I was through the door, eager to put as much distance as possible between myself and the harsh light of the exterior. I found myself in a warm, inevitably white corridor. A series of rectangular windows were inset in the walls and appeared to look down onto rooms below, like the viewing galleries of an operating theatre. I moved towards the first of the windows, ripping off the gas mask so I could see more clearly. The room below was bathed in a purplish light, banks of machinery in a wide crescent taking up most of the space, along with some kind of viewing screen. On it was projected a huge map of the world, various cities ringed in yellow. Puzzling over what this could mean, I stole further along the corridor to another window and peeked down. Stretched out on a padded table lay a male form, naked save for his staggeringly white underwear. A figure in a lab coat and surgical mask hovered at the head end of the table, then suddenly stepped back and revealed, lying there, eyes closed and hair plastered to his sweat-soaked forehead like a raven's wing, Kingdom Come. What the hell was going on? In my mind, conflicting thoughts tumbled over one another. He'd been in at the death of Vivian Hoopla. Then, on the train, he'd tried unsuccessfully to warn me off. Finally, he'd shot dead Whitley's contact in the Hagia Sophia. So what had he done to displease his masters? Why was he lying there, presumably about to suffer some unspeakable agony? Suddenly his heavy-lidded eyes fluttered open. I fumbled for my gas mask. Too late. Kingdom Come's almond eyes focused on me, and a befuddled frown of recognition passed across his face. His torturer span round, and he too became aware of my silvery head bobbing at the window. Leaning over, he flicked a small red switch on a console. In the corridor, a tannoy system crackled into life. "Kemal," came the technician's voice. "Where the hell have you been? Stop gawping. Get yourself down here, will you? This one is tough." By the time I entered the operating theatre, the white-coated torturer had returned to the captive Kingdom Come. "Now," he hissed at the semi-naked youth, "you will start talking. You will die, of course. How quickly and how painlessly, my friend, is entirely your decision." Silently I made my way over and stood just behind the torturer's right shoulder. Kingdom Come turned his head towards me and stared intently into my face. Then slowly, insolently, he spoke to Whitecoat. "I'm telling you nothing, baby. But your friend here, if he asks nicely, can find out everything I know about Black Butterfly." What strange game was this? Was he bargaining for his life? Then things happened very quickly. Turning to face me properly for the first time, a look of confusion crossed the torturer's face. "Hey," he accused, "you're not—" I lashed out with my fist, catching the fellow under the chin. He was flung against the wall and crumpled into a white heap. From the operating table came a soft chuckle. "Man," said Kingdom Come, "you still got it." "All right, my friend," I snapped. "Now would you mind telling me exactly what's going on?" Come shook his head. "No time. We have to get out of here. Fast." I snorted with derision. "Hey, come on, baby. You saw the mess I was in. You honestly think I'd be strapped to this thing if I was working for these goons?" Every instinct within me protested, and yet moments later I had released Kingdom Come's shackles. I watched as he struggled into his torturer's clothes, and soon the two of us were walking swiftly from the operating theatre, gas masks firmly in place. I intended to get the two of us out of there pronto and attempt to meet up with Whitley Bay and his men in the forest. My colleague, however, had other ideas. He pulled up abruptly outside a white door marked "No Entry." The youth pushed his unruly fringe from his eyes. "I know you have no reason to trust me, baby, but there's something I need to take from here. Either you go now and let me get it on my own, or you come with me and we help each other get out of here alive." "All right," I sighed, "but cross me and I'll kill you, baby." The boy giggled and stealthily pushed open the door. We found ourselves in a darkened, rather airless room. To our left, the wall was composed almost entirely of narrow drawers such as might contain seed specimens. "They're moving out," Come told me enigmatically. "The work here is pretty much done." "What work?" I asked quietly. But the boy didn't answer, just slipped noiselessly into the shadows and began rooting through the drawers. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I looked around the chaotic room. Scattered across wooden surfaces were a variety of scientific instruments, microscope slides, petri dishes, syringes, and all manner of other stuff I couldn't identify. I was making my way over towards the instruments when I became aware of a strange sound, a fluttering, beating noise, barely perceptible at first, but increasing in volume as I neared the far wall. Then I realized that the wall behind the laboratory workbenches was actually thick, velvety drapes. Curious, I dragged them back and let out a long, slow breath. Revealed was a vast butterfly enclosure, a lepidopterium, I suppose, its thousands of black inhabitants colliding against one another in that stuffy, crowded environment. Particles of dust hung like pollen in the air. I peered through the clear glass. They were large creatures, and their fat, hairy bodies made my skin crawl. "Pretty, huh?" came the murmur of Kingdom Come from across the other side of the lab. "Les papillons noirs." "Properly speaking, hun, papilio obscurus," he whispered. "But the high school lecture can wait. If you're done there, I've got what I need." He held up a slim glass tube before my face and rattled the contents. Then the cotton wool silence was ripped apart by the scream of a klaxon. I glanced at my watch. The hour was more than up. Whitley Bay's men had arrived. Distantly I heard the thrum-thrum of machine gun fire. The two of us raced outside. The air was alive with smoky scents. I found the hole in the fence that I'd cut on my way in, and we scuttled through, first the boy and then myself. Keeping low, we put on some speed and made for the safety of the forest. After 5 minutes of running, I was exhausted. Hang on, I gasped. "Give me a moment." Kingdom Come nodded, and I sank back against the gnarled bark of a tree. The sweeping arc of light from the clinic silhouetted the slender trees, turning them into prison bars. I reached into my trousers and pulled out another of the Royal Academy's little miracles, a sachet of rehydration fluid, one of several sewn into the lining below my belt. I drank it gratefully and then turned to offer one to my companion. Oh, how inevitable. I was alone in the forest. Kingdom Come had charmed me, duped me, and now had made his escape. Gunfire crackled from the distant clinic, and the blare of the klaxon made me wince. I heard shouting coming from behind me. It was time to get out of the vicinity. I set off at a slow jog, but had only gone a few hundred yards when a hulking silhouette barred the path before me.
"All right, Petal," said the shape. "Hey, I can't leave you alone for 5 minutes, can I?"
It was Whitley Bay, and, clamped in the crook of his immense forearm, gasping for air, struggled the elusive Kingdom Come. Rain was tipping down outside the long window, but in the dimness of the university, a 3-barred electric fire glowed cheerfully. Just as promised, Whitley Bay had given me my hour's grace, and then he and his men had hit the enemy headquarters with everything they had. Unfortunately, it seemed the place was booby-trapped, and so, seconds after the young Turks had shot their way inside, the building had gone up in flames. In the chaos, the few surviving white-coated figures had escaped, leaving behind little evidence of their activities. At least, though, we had Kingdom Come. He was huddled in a thick blanket before the fire, staring into space. There was something of the trapped beast about him, feral, suspicious, dangerous. Whitley Bay sat bass-ackwards in a chair, paring his nails with a brutal-looking knife and shooting resentful glares at the newcomer. I stretched out my aching legs and lit a cigarette. Then I cleared my throat and said, "So, who exactly are you working for?" The boy shrugged. "I don't have time for this, Toots. You gotta let me go. Certain persons ain't gonna be too happy if you don't."
"Who the hell are you working for?" snarled Whitley Bay. "Who?"
"Don't you mean, for whom are you working?" Before I could stop him, Whitley had shot from his chair and smacked the youth across the face. "You cheeky get," he spat. "I'll bloody crown ye." I nodded towards the door. "All right, Whitley, I'll take it from here." Reluctantly, the big man stomped from the office. Kingdom Come stretched out his long legs and regarded his bare feet. Then he looked up, head on one side like a nervous bird. "Hey, handsome, did I say thanks?" "Thanks? For rescuing me." "As a matter of fact, you didn't. In fact, you behaved rather rudely, trying to run off like that." He shook his head, leaned over, and slipped a single digit through my fingers and into my palm, moving it around in a neat circle. "You, want to let me make it up to you?" Suddenly I heard raised voices in the outer office. I pulled my hand away, and Kingdom Come scraped back the hair from his face. "You wanted some answers," he said. "Then you're in luck, baby." The door opened to reveal a rain-soaked figure. He shook out his umbrella and waved a silly little wave. "Fear not, only me," said Alan Playfair. My face fell. "What the hell is this?" Playfair crossed to the fire and warmed his hands. "This, old love, is the end of a very long game." Another hotel room, a long way from Istanbul. Beyond the balcony, the lights of Kingston, Jamaica, sparkled like cut glass. There'd been no explanations, no chance to say farewell to a baffled-looking Whitley Bay, and after a whispered conference between Playfair and Kingdom Come, I'd been bundled into a taxi to the airport. Alan Playfair tossed his straw hat onto the bed and plonked himself down next to me on the balcony. "Well, old love, this is the life, eh?" I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. Would it be too much to ask, old love, what the bloody hell's going on? I've been blundering around like a blasted mole, when all along my own people seem to have known about the whole thing. Playfair shook his head. Au contraire. You got a lead via the strange behaviour of Sir Vivian Hoopla. That took you to Istanbul and finally to the clinic, where you were good enough to save the life of Mr. Come. He looked at me over his pipe and pulled a face. Trouble is, you very nearly blew many months of careful planning, and I sat up, stiff with anger. I was promised answers. Fire away, old love. I tried to marshal my thoughts. Hoopla's death, it wasn't the first of its kind. Spot on. Sir Douglas Go-Between, Baroness Watchbell, and that French priest, all of them died in bizarre, reckless accidents. Playfair chuckled. No flies on you, old love, but did you discover the connection? I shrugged. Black butterfly. Top marks. I hunched forward. So this new drug... Well, that's just the thing, old love, Playfair corrected me. It's not new at all. I don't follow. Playfair got up and poured us both a cool gin. Turns out it was something we were working on years ago. The forces of light, that is. Back at the turn of the century, in fact. He grinned. Your heyday. I took the glass with ill grace. Black butterfly is distilled from the wings of the Papilio obscurus, he continued, found only in the Balkans. Butterflies have a sort of dust on their scales. It acts like a psychotropic drug, induces temporary euphoria and an incredible increase in the metabolic rate. Back in the day, the thinking was it might be very useful on the battlefield, indestructible soldiers and so forth, you see. I turned weary eyes towards him. There's a but coming, isn't there? I can always sense a but. The stuff was lethal, said Playfair, drove its subjects off their heads, induced strokes, heart failure, created birth problems in their offspring. All round, a disaster. So the project was abandoned. I rubbed my bristly chin. And the project's team members, right again. Go-Between as Defence Secretary sanctioned the experiments. Baroness Watchbell, pharmacist, Yes, she and Per Medler headed the scientific team, and Vivian Hoopla, as head of the Board of Health, was obviously keen to keep a weather eye on their progress. I looked out over the balcony towards the crashing sea. So this is, what, some kind of revenge scheme? Someone using a new form of the drug to kill off the people originally responsible for it? Playfair swirled the ice around his glass and took a small sip. That's what we reckon. Outstanding questions being who and why. What about Christopher Miracle? That old friend of mine who drove his car into the sea off Cape Town. It's the same pattern. Was he anything to do with the original drug trial? Never heard of him, old love. Must just be coincidence. Top up. I shook my head. I have another outstanding question for you. Who the hell is Kingdom Come? Can't you guess? Playfair asked softly. Really, one can't make a move without the Yanks these days. CIA, I offered. Playfair nodded. Damned good field agent. He pieced together the whole thing. That's why he was in London. He knew the black butterfly people were after Hoopla, traced him to the blood orange, but someone had already slipped the old fellow the pill. He got there too late. Well, you know the rest. But the girl in the Hagia Sophia, I protested, he killed her before she could kill that interesting Turkish guerrilla you'd befriended, said Playfair. There was no contact out to betray Black Butterfly. They knew that the young Turks were sniffing round, so they fed them just enough titbits to intrigue the silly fools, and then arranged to meet Whitley Bay and put him out of the way. I gazed at him coolly. After that, said Playfair, Mr. Cum tried to infiltrate their headquarters, but was captured. Happily, you turned up to save the day, so all was not lost. So why are we here? In Jamaica? The last link in the chain, said Playfair, setting down his gin. The remaining target in this curious revenge, Lord Battenberg. He discovered the Papilio obscurus butterfly itself on some boy's own adventure of his out in the wilds, then happened upon its extraordinary properties once back in his laboratory. Anyway, he's coming out here the day after tomorrow to open the World Government Summit. So why are we sitting here? I said. Why aren't you doing something, Playfair? I am doing something, he said tartly. I've taken personal charge of Lord Battenberg's security. We've got people tasting everything he eats and drinks. I shook my head in disbelief. He must cancel the summit meeting. It's far too dangerous. No, soothed Playfair. Don't you see? We still have no idea who's behind the whole ruddy scheme. We have to let their plans take their course so that we can nip in and grab the whole gang. And where do I fit in? Well, drawled Playfair, I thought you'd like to be in on the kill, as it were. Nice big coup for the service, handing over the baton and all that. I rose to my feet, a little drunk. No, thanks. You'll forgive me, I'm sure, but I think I've seen quite enough. I grabbed my jacket and stalked from the room. In Jamaica, they call the wind that blows in from the centre of the island the Undertaker's wind. It stirred my snowy hair and made me shiver despite the balminess of the violet evening. I stood in the hotel lobby, the door ajar. I was absolutely bloody furious. I'd been patronised, misled, and ignored. And what of Kingdom Come? Was it genuine respect that had made him try to warn me off back on the train? I'd saved his life in the clinic, but had his thanks been sincere? Or was he touched the way a dog owner is when his arthritic old pooch unexpectedly manages a long-forgotten trick? But then I remembered his fingers stroking my palm and the wonderful heat of him in that tiny, dark room. I walked to the front desk and asked for Kingdom's room. A sweating concierge told me that Mr. Cum was on the second floor in room 209. I could go up and see him. There'd been something there beneath the boy's bravado. I was sure of it. And I could do with some affection. But I didn't go upstairs. Instead, I left the hotel and walked beneath the palms that lined the driveway. I was Lucifer Box, and I didn't need anyone. The blare of a car horn snapped me from my reverie, and I watched as a flotilla of limousines glided past on the main road, the flags on their bonnets fluttering. No doubt various dignitaries arriving for the World Government Summit. The cars drew up outside a huge, domed conference centre. They were busy people, in a hurry. Not yesterday's men. I cursed my self-pity and tried to pull myself together. Out on the promenade, I listened to the sound of the surf and the shuffle of my shoes on the cracked pavement, and then a harsh, flapping sound made me look up. I was in front of what looked like some kind of concert hall, cream-painted and monumental. A huge banner hung from the facade. I squinted up to see the legend, "The Great New Scout Jamboree." Of course. The Jamboree. I'd only half listened back when I'd taken Christmas to that wretched scout camp. Was it possible? Not Kingston-on-Thames, but Kingston, Jamaica? Could my little boy be here? I walked up the wide marble steps to the glass doors of the concert hall. Within, a desk lamp was the only illumination. I tried the door. To my surprise, it opened, and I entered a high-ceilinged lobby. The silence was as deep as the carpet. "Hello?" No response. I padded towards the desk. A cigarette was burning in an ashtray, grey smoke idling towards the ceiling. A muffled flush explained the smoker's absence, and I turned towards the sound. A door opened, and a slender silhouette appeared. It stopped sharply at the sight of me. "Why?" came a woman's voice. "It's Mr. Box, isn't it?" The figure stepped into the light. It was Melissa Forethought. It felt like months since I'd met her at the camp. "My dear Miss Forethought, how lovely to see you again." She batted her eyelashes. "I was just, passing through, and I rather wondered how my son—" "Oh, you wish to see little Christmas? Alas, you can't visit him tonight. Early to bed, early to rise, and all that. But tomorrow—" She consulted the desk diary. "Shall we say, 2 o'clock? "Smashing. Well, good night, then. I do hope Christmas—" The words died on my lips. As Miss Forethought leaned over to write in the diary, the dim light of the desk lamp illuminated her slightly exposed bosom, and there, on her breast, was a tattoo of a small black butterfly. Melissa Forethought narrowed her green eyes and glanced down at her chest. "Dear me," she said, "how careless." In one smooth movement she pulled a long-barreled pistol from her smock. There was a soft, swishing sound. I felt a sharp pain in the neck and knew nothing more. The globular light overhead was like an eyeball dangling from a nerve. Heavy leather straps bound me to a table at the ankles, across the chest, and over the neck. My hands were secured by tight leather cuffs. An insistent itch on my throat reminded me where the tranquilizer dart had hit home. How long had I been there? A metal door opened, and soft footsteps padded close by. And then, suddenly, a face loomed startlingly over mine, the lower half concealed by a surgical mask, the hair tucked away inside a white cap. Green eyes blazed down. "Are you quite comfortable, Mr. Box?" asked Melissa Forethought. "Not at all." "Glad to hear it. I must say I'm impressed. You are a game old thing." I beamed. "You're too kind." My exhausted mind was reeling from this new development. What the hell did Melissa Forethought have to do with the whole black butterfly setup? She sat down on a stool just by my head, and there was a soft sigh from the padded white seat. "Now then," she breathed, "it's rather important that you tell me what you know, or think you know, about what we're doing here. Of course, we have ways and means of extracting such information, but why don't we save ourselves a lot of unpleasantness? Just pucker up, Mr. Box, and whisper some sweet nothings in my ear." "That's just what I will whisper." "Nothing." She gave a little snigger and pulled her stool closer to the table. "I'm a specialist," she said quietly into my ear, "as I'm sure you were. Once." She wheeled her stool away, and I felt a sudden movement around my ankles. My shoes were unlaced and then, together with my socks, pulled off. Here it came. What the devil did she have planned for me? Bamboo rammed into the flesh under my toenails? The white-orange flame of a blowtorch? I tensed myself for the inevitable agony. Nothing. Then I twitched as I felt a sudden bizarre movement on my bare feet. It was a soft, swishing motion, back and forth over the arches and under the toes. The silly bitch was tickling me with a feather. "My travels have taken me to some interesting places, Mr. Box," said the girl. "I long ago discovered that pain and pleasure are but two sides of the same coin. You have no idea how much a man can give away when the core of his soul has been exposed." Soon I was laughing out loud, a delightful tingling running up and down my spine. This reminds me. Miss Forethought's head cocked to one side. Barber shops. Oh, I snorted. Electrical clippers. Such a pleasant sensation when the back of one's neck is buzzed over. Sweat was beading my face and dripping over my lips. I laughed convulsively from deep inside my chest, and the aged muscles in my sides started to twinge. And all at once I realized that I really, really wanted the pleasant sensation to stop. I began to arch my back, shrinking from Miss Forethought's tender ministrations, but the straps held me tight, and my whole body began to shudder. "Stop!" I croaked. Please, stop!" "Tell me then, quickly, why are you here? What do you know?" I gasped and sank my teeth into my lip at the terrible loveliness of it all. Soon, I knew, I would have to tell her everything, that MI6 were onto her organization, that even now a trap was being laid for her. My pulse throbbed in my temple, my head felt as though it would burst. Then, unexpectedly, the door shushed smoothly open. "Desist," said a quiet voice. Reluctantly, Melissa Forethought sat back on her stool. The relief was glorious, incredible. "You won't get anything out of Mr. Box." The voice was cold and measured as droplets from an icicle. "He's one of the old school." "What then?" snapped Forethought. "Shall I shoot him?" "Oh, no, nothing so vulgar. No, we shall be kind to Mr. Lucifer Box," whispered the voice. "It is time for him to be embraced by the wings of the black butterfly." There was a faint tinkling sound from close by. Then Forethought was once more leaning over me. Savagely, she yanked open my mouth, dropped something inside, and a bitter taste spread over my tongue. Almost at once, my head began to swim. But as I blacked out, one thought began to race around my exhausted brain. I knew that voice. I knew that voice of old. It was Dr. Fetch. It was the voice of Acronym. There's a sound, incessant, pulsing, like a drum roll that doesn't stop. Eyes open, a great panorama, a cinemascope of water, mirror blue, then brown, navy, and finally cornflower blue as it meets the sky. Eyes close. I'm numb, Novocaine numb. There's a voice from somewhere. My voice. Wake up, wake up, wake up. But it's all I can do to lie there. The pulsing sound beats on and on. Then there's another sound, a crashing, rolling roar, and I can move my head a little. There's sand in my mouth, rough, salty sand. Sunlight washes over me, and it's wonderful. The hairs on my arms rise up. Eyes open. By now the numbness is passing, and I sit up, and I'm dizzy, and the world seems too big, and I clamp shut my eyes again until the pulsing and the pounding dies down a little, just a little. And then I look at my hands, hold them out in front of me, and I realize they're not my hands. I flip them over and back a dozen times. They're smooth, pink, unblemished. They are my hands, but yesterday's hands. Now I use them to slowly, carefully unbutton my shirt, and they feel strange, as though they're frost-nipped, like when I threw snowballs as a child. Now my shirt is open, and I'm looking down at my chest. It's a fine chest, well-muscled. There's a line of black hair like a trail of iron filings leading over the flat stomach to my groin. And now the pulsing, pounding roars in my head, and glee grips me, and I stand up and run my hands over my exposed torso and face. Everywhere my fingers meet firm lines, taut muscles, my cheekbones sharp as blades on ice. It's impossible. It's wonderful, and it can't be true. I run to the surf and splash my face in the blood-warm water. Mirror, 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 mirror. I have to find a mirror. I stumble back over the dunes, the breeze flapping at my open shirt. Then I'm suddenly on a long ribbon of potholed road, and the tarmac is bubbling in the heat. My legs feel strong and lean and long. Then there's a honking sound, and I think it's a car, and I turn, and it's an open-top tourer, and the driver is an old lady. I smile. She looks like a pig in a wig, her cloud of white hair framed by a huge pink hat. She slows down as she approaches, and the breeze flaps at my open shirt and trousers. She pulls up just by me and drags her white oval sunglasses down the bridge of her snout. "Hi," she says, and she drawls it like a record slowing down. "Hello." The word sounds odd in my mouth. It's yesterday's voice, a young voice. "Heading for Kingston?" She pats the white seat next to her. "Hop in, honey. I could use the company." So I get in, and the car speeds away, and I close my eyes and revel in the glorious feeling of the wind streaming through my long, sleek, jet-black hair. No one has gazed on this particular face since King Bertie died, and now this kindly old dame has me all to herself. Eyes close. Eyes open, and suddenly we're in the city. She slows down the car, and I hop out and blow her a kiss. As she drives off, she looks awfully disappointed. The hotel's facade has taken on a peachy glow in the dying sun. It's beautiful. Everything is beautiful. I'm beautiful. Then there's a number in my head, 209, 209. I begin to climb the huge plane tree by the eastern wall of the hotel. With all my long-forgotten agility, I quickly scale the branches. Then I jump from the tree onto a striped awning and get a foothold on the first-floor balcony. From there I clamber up another floor until I'm standing, panting but exhilarated, outside the half-open windows of Kingdom Come's room. Muslin curtains flutter. The boy lies dozing on the bed, one arm tucked under his head. He's wearing a pair of shorts. That's all. Then my own clothes are on the floor, and the pulsing and the pounding is like a tidal wave in my head, and Miss Beveridge can go hang, and I'm Lucifer Box, and I'm alive again, and I fall upon him like a starving man upon a banquet. At last the boy opens one lazy eye and tickles his long fingers over my chest. "You're full of surprises, baby," I hear him say, though his voice sounds funny, like a bad connection on the telephone. "What happened to you? Good thing I love older men, huh?" I laugh. "What is there between us now? 5 years? 6? I sit up, stretch. "What now?" I say. "What shall we do now?" "Well, in case you've forgotten, lover, I have some bad men to track down." I wave that away and jump off the bed, throwing open the shutters and letting the orange blaze of the sunset wash over my flesh. No. We have to track them down. You and me must get on. Maybe we could go for a drive. Would you like that, Kingdom? Drive down to a casino and lose a pot of money? No, we have to get after Black Butterfly, don't we? Oh, I know something you don't know. The boy's face creases in a frown, and he looks deep into my eyes, and he says, "Oh, God, not you too." But I'm not listening, because visible through the parted shutters is a beautiful red Chevrolet Corvette convertible. It glitters in the light from the ocean. I want it so badly. I wanted the boy, and I got him. Now I must have the car. And then I'm throwing on my clothes and tearing downstairs with Kingdom rushing after me. Wait! Outside the night is warm and beautiful and alive with a chant of insects. Then Kingdom's hands are on me, but they are no longer a lover's hands. Now they try to pull me back, to constrain me. "Take these! You must take these, baby!" But I push him away. He comes back, so I punch him, and he goes down. Then I'm inside the car and trying to start it. Then there's a cloud of dust and scorched rubber, and I'm thundering onto the main road. I jab the heel of my hand against the horn, and the hot evening splits apart with the shrill blast. "Come on!" I yell. "Come on! Out of the blasted way!" And I'm grinning now, and my face aches with it, and the shrieking laughter that I can't keep down. Houses that are just corrugated roofs glitter in the neon wash. I zip past and try to overtake a fat Mercedes. Its horn screeches. In response, I catch a glimpse of the driver's bleached face, and he looks so scared that I laugh again and then swing the Chevy round towards him. There's a big crunch, and its loudness surprises me, but I like the sound, so I do it again. But then the Mercedes suddenly drops back, and I'm totally blindsided, and he hammers into the rear of me. I grapple with the dimpled steering wheel, but my hands are slick with sweat, and the Chevrolet leaps into the oncoming lane. There's a fresh chorus of enraged horns. It's a fanfare. I laugh again. Then there's a stomach-deep thump, and then a whiplash that makes me feel sick, and I'm flung violently to the right. And then there's nothing but a skidding swirl as the car spins off the road. Headlights and taillights and neon signs and bar signs screw up into fireworks, and then the car crunches onto its side, and I feel heat as though an oven door has swung open. Then sudden cool, and I know I've been thrown clear, and the light is strange and different, and I taste coarse sand in my mouth. I look round quickly. The Chevrolet is on its side next to a knot of palm trees, flames licking at its rear. I drag myself away just as the fire takes hold and the car explodes. I turn my face away from the fierce orange glow, and then I hear another car. It screams across the beach, and Kingdom Come gets out and runs over to me. Then his long fingers are on my mouth, and something bitter is dropped on my tongue, and he's forcing me to swallow. But I'm not interested in him, because I see something that doesn't make sense. In the hard, white sand is one of the Chevrolet's wing mirrors. It's cracked in two, but in the moonlight and the glow from the wreck, My own face is reflected back. And it's the face of an old man. I felt a bar of sunlight on my eyes and was suddenly awake. I took in the iron-framed bed, the white-walled room, the ridiculous pyjamas into which I'd been decanted. Kingdom Come, arms folded and quietly watching me, sat opposite. "Hey," he said. "How you feeling?" I rubbed a hand over my bristly chin. I felt ancient, fragile as a disinterred mummy. "Where am I?" I said at last. "Private hospital in Kingston." He got up and poured a glass of water. "You don't remember what happened?" I took the water and then noticed my own trembling hand, my delicate, veiny, age-spotted hand. I know you, don't I?" I said, smiling at the boy. He nodded. "And there was something about butterflies. I'm rather fond of butterflies." "It's okay, baby," soothed Kingdom. "Take it easy." He stroked back the hair from my forehead. "Thought I'd never catch you. I got the antidote to you just in time." He took a glass tube from his pocket and rattled it. "I liberated them from the clinic, remember?" "I remember a Chevrolet." I looked over at the boy, and the soft line of his neck and jaw brought back other, even sweeter sensations. "And I remember you." I winked at him. The boy laughed, then looked down, eyelashes beating a slow tattoo. I held up my hands before me. "It's such a shame I'm so old, my dear boy. You're a looker, and then some. My God, in my day—" I trailed off. Funny, but somehow it doesn't seem that long ago. Young, vital, so alive. Kingdom leaned forward and took my hand. "It wasn't so long ago, baby." The door clicked open to reveal a smiling man. He was dressed in an absurdly colourful shirt and colonial shorts. His milk-white knees were as knobbly as golf balls. "Hello, old love," said the newcomer, frowning. "How are you feeling?" "Fine," I said. I clamped shut my eyes. My addled mind felt as if it was awash with soup. "But I wish I could remember," I tutted, thumping the side of my head in frustration. "Why can't I remember?" Alan Playfair exchanged a worried look with Kingdom Come, and then patted the bedclothes. "Listen, old love, you mustn't think about all that. You've been in the wars, and according to Mr. Come here, you were ruddy lucky to escape unscathed. I think it's time we got you home." He opened his jacket and pulled out a rectangle of paper. "First class back to Blighty." He gave a signal, and two young men of about 18 stepped dutifully into the room. Blonde and fit, they were in some kind of uniform. Long khaki shorts and socks, broad-brimmed hats hanging on a string behind their backs. "Hello," I called gaily. "Who are you?" "This is Heathcote," said Playfair, slowly, as though addressing a child, "and this is Amory. They're part of Lord Battenberg's personal security team, but I don't suppose you remember any of that." Then all of a sudden everything was clear. My faculties snapped back into place like an elastic band. "Oh, my God!" I yelled. "That's it! That's it!" Playfair frowned. "That's what?" I stared at the newcomers. "They're his bodyguard, Battenberg's bodyguard." Playfair nodded. "Part of it. Sends just the right message, don't you think? 20 strapping young men from different nations. What could be better? I say, old love, you're sounding more like your old self." My mind was clearing all the time. The new scout movement. Melissa Forethought, I shouted. They're the front for acronym. Playfair chuckled. "Now, steady on, old love." "Playfair," I said patiently. "Alan, my son is here in Jamaica, attending the new scout movement's great jamboree. After I left you in the hotel, I went down to try and see him. While I was there, I met a woman I'd last seen at a new scout camp back in England. Surely no surprise there. She had a tattoo, Playfair, on her breast, a black butterfly. I was knocked out. I'm not surprised, chuckled Playfair. I glared at him. Then I was tortured. And then there was a voice. The voice of Dr. Fetch. The whole New Scout movement is a cover for acronym. They're back. Acronym? Scoffed Playfair, shaking his head. Nobody's heard from them in 40-odd years. Get a ruddy grip, old love. Sooner we send you back home, the better. Why would I make this up? I said. Look, said Playfair, I understand. I really do. You can't bear the idea of packing it all in. And then somebody fed you that bloody awful narcotic and you've got things all upside down. Yes, I cried, someone did feed me the drug. Acronym. Playfair shot a pleading look at Kingdom Come, who just shrugged helplessly. In your mind, he continued, you've dreamt up this story, bringing back the great nemesis from your heyday. It's all true, damn you! I glared up at the bland, imperturbable faces of the scouts. And what's more, they know it. Now that's enough, barked Playfair. He turned to Heathcote and Amory. Escort Mr. Box to the airport, would you, boys? He tossed over the airline ticket. He has a plane to catch. One way. I sweltered in the leathery stink of the vehicle, squeezed unpleasantly between the twin scouts, Heathcote and Amory. A third scout, Mexican, and as impassive as his fellows, was driving. The city rolled by, serene and ordinary, but my mind was racing. Dr. Fetch was alive. It was incredible, impossible. Yet, as I'd succumbed to the wretched black butterfly drug, I'd recognized his voice. I would know those Arctic tones anywhere, even after 50 years. But how could my nemesis have survived? This, though, was not the time for reflection. I risked a look at my captors, their brawny bodies pressed against my sides. The scouts should have looked absurd, hulking great brutes in silly uniforms, but their muscular frames and grim, set faces brooked no argument. I sighed. Playfair had been completely duped. Acronym wouldn't have to worry about getting past Lord Battenberg's security. Acronym were his security. I stared down at Heathcote's huge red knees, wondering whether the scouts would follow through Playfair's orders and deliver me to the airport, or whether they had a nice little detour planned, ending with a bullet in the back of my neck. A sign for the airport flashed by. This was my last throw. Might I smoke? I asked. Amory shrugged and looked away. I produced my cigarette case and lit up. Heathcote watched suspiciously. I drew on my fag, and as I did so feigned a violent spasm of coughing, bringing down my elbow sharply onto the webbed belt that ran around the inside of my trousers. The Academy's hardware showed its mettle once again as I felt my emergency rehydration packs rupture and begin to bleed out onto the cloth. Oh, God, I moaned. How shaming. Both scouts looked down at my crotch and horrid little grins crept across their smooth young faces. It was all the chance I needed. With all my strength, I threw a punch and got Amory under the firm line of his jaw, my knuckles cracking like tinder in a bonfire. His square head rammed into the window, and he fell back at once, out cold. Then I swung over and chopped the edge of my hand into Heathcote's windpipe. The lad rasped in agony, and as he slid down the leather seat, I seized the dagger-like knife that was stuffed down the top of his socks. The car swerved alarmingly, and I saw the Mexican driver's startled eyes in the mirror as he took in the chaotic scene. "Pull up!" I shouted, jabbing the knife at the back of his neck as though pricking a sausage. "Now! Now!" He screeched over to the side of the road and slammed on the brakes. I fell forward, but managed to thump the boy in the back of the head with the hilt of the dagger, and he collapsed over the wheel. I took a panting, excited breath and clambered out. Now, if I could just get to the summit in time. I turned my step towards the brand-new conference centre that I had passed only 24 hours before. Thanks to Kingdom Come's espionage, I knew this was where Acronym intended to strike. Alan Playfair might be smugly complacent that no one could possibly attack Lord Battenberg, but I knew better. Dr. Cassavellaunus Fetch was capable of anything. I stumbled on until the conference centre suddenly loomed up out of the night like a great beach ball. Tonight, the leaders of the free world would be assembled there. A little to my left, going almost unnoticed because of all the hoo-ha out front, stood a flotilla of trucks. From it issued a steady stream of tuxedoed men hefting crates, bottles and crockery. Caterers! Thank God! I stood up, hoped no one would notice the absence of a dicky bow in my ensemble, and joined the queue of waiters, picking up a crate of plonk and passing inside completely undetected. The distant murmur of a crowd caught my attention at once, and I climbed a stained concrete staircase, 2, 3, 4 floors, until I reached a thick steel door. Carefully I turned the handle and found myself standing at the very top of a vast steel dome, lights twinkling in its ceiling like captured stars. Pushing the door fully open, I stepped out onto one of the narrow gantries that ring the dome. Far below, long, semicircular tables had been erected, behind which the international delegates were beginning to take their seats, among them the British contingent, the dependable old PM, fat as a Buddha in his pinstripe, casually making small talk with the sun-tanned, distinguished, and doomed Lord Battenberg. Before the delegates' tables was a ring of bulky, unmanned television cameras, and curiously, close by the cameras was ranged an enormous bank of television sets, humming gently. Encircling the round room were the new Scout bodyguard, the buttons on their uniforms shiny as gold nuggets. I counted 18 burly young men of various races, unsmiling to a man. Alan Playfair, looking immensely self-important, stood nearby. What could I do? If I tried to warn Lord Battenberg, Playfair would have me carted off again. If I tried to disrupt the ceremony, the Scout bodyguard might strike elsewhere. I looked down again at the Scouts and frowned. Playfair had said there would be 20 of them. I'd accounted for 3 in the car, so why were there 18 remaining? I was about to move forward on the gantry when I became horribly aware of a presence behind me.
Well, well, well. You're like the proverbial bad penny, aren't you, Mr. Box?
I turned slowly and stared not only into the face of the lethally lovely Melissa Forethought, but also into the barrel of a .357 Magnum. The girl was dressed in the deceptively conservative garb of the New Scout movement, a yellow neckerchief around her pale throat, a buff skirt clinging to her shapely hips and thighs.
I underestimated you, she said. None of our victims has yet managed to survive the exquisite delights of Black Butterfly. I should be most interested to hear how you succeeded in regaining your sanity.
She gestured ahead with the Magnum, and we made our vertiginous progress around the perimeter of the dome until she ordered me to stop by another narrow door. Keeping the gun trained on me, she leaned over and pushed it open. In the room beyond, huge arched windows looked down onto the hall with a row of comfortable-looking black chairs positioned alongside them. Against one wall stood a bank of television screens like those in the main chamber. Otherwise the room appeared to be empty.
Take a seat, Mr. Box, instructed the girl.
I did so, feigning an indifference I did not feel. And now? I asked.
Now it's time for you to meet the leader of the New Scout movement, the man who has revived acronym and the genius who will be responsible for unleashing the power of Black Butterfly upon the world.
And then the furthest chair in the row, some 11 or 12 along from the place I occupied, slowly revolved. A chill passed through my body as I prepared once more, after nearly 50 years, to behold my greatest foe. But sitting on the shiny black leather was not Dr. Fetch. "Christmas!" I cried, astonished. And there he was, my own son, resplendent in a brand-new scout uniform, his hands folded neatly in his lap. "What the blazes do you think you're doing?" I demanded. "Using a child?"
"Not just any child," chuckled Forethought. "Why don't you be a good boy, Christmas, and tell your daddy what you've learned, eh?"
My son's dark eyes flashed and he grinned.
"On my honor, I will do my best," he intoned, "to do my duty to the Arcala and my fellows and to obey the New Scout law."
Miss Forethought nodded encouragingly at him.
"To harm the weak all the time, and to do my level best to destroy the pantomime of Western democracy." "You see, Mr. Box," purred the girl, "Christmas is our final triumph. Your son belongs to the movement, body and soul."
I started as a soft giggle sounded from behind the panelled walls. The hair on my neck rose, as though caressed by the touch of a tarantula. "Fetch!" I snarled. "Is that you? Still skulking about in the shadows? Show yourself, or daren't you face me?" For answer, the wall glided back with a soft whir, and a figure stepped into the room. It was another child, stumpy-legged, aspirin-white, with hollow, burning, hate-filled eyes. Of course, I'd seen him before. It was the weird, sickly-looking creature I had glimpsed watching me through the window at the scout camp months before, in London. But then I realized that this was no boy. The shriveled skin, the stunted, dwarfish demeanor, even the coiled curls of yellow hair more resembled the sparse tresses of an old man.
"Mr. Box," he said, "at last we meet."
The voice. It was Fetch's voice. What was this? A ventriloquist act? Was he some kind of doll? Miss Forethought saw the confusion on my face and smiled.
"Mr. Lucifer Box," she said, "may I introduce you to Cassivalaunus Fetch, Junior."
I have to admit that, in spite of the clear danger I found myself in, I burst out laughing. "Fetch actually managed to produce a sprog?" I asked incredulously. What a horrible thought. "And you have been reviving the family business, have you? Nice to see a bit of gumption amongst the young." I looked closer at the goblin-like creature. "No, you're not young, are you? You'll forgive me for asking, I'm sure, but is there something wrong with you?" Fetch Jr. hissed as though physically wounded.
"You cannot begin to imagine the torments my father suffered after you handed him over to your superiors. They treated him as a human guinea pig. They sent him to a dismal asylum where he became part of a scheme to determine the effects of a new drug that the British government was developing as a weapon of war."
"Ah," I said. "I see.
And when they had broken him, when the black butterfly had ravaged him, and he was no more than a shell of the great man he had once been, there was no one left to care. No one except
your darling mummy, whoever she was. I nodded slowly. So that's it. The drug caused birth defects as well. No wonder they broke off the testing. A drug like that in the wrong hands. A chilling giggle escaped from Fetch Jr.'s flaky lips. He stretched his palms out towards me.
Do you know what these are?
What?
The wrong hands. But if my body is permanently stunted, he crowed, my mind has grown exponentially. The rediscovery of Black Butterfly, all my work, the systematic elimination of those invertebrates who developed it, Go-Between, Meddler, Watchbell, and of course that fine hypocrite Sir Vivian Hoopla, all my work.
I recalled the sight of the old fool Hoopla in the Blood Orange Club that night. And then I suddenly remembered that scout with the collecting tin. I'd been so convinced that Kingdom Come had been behind the murder that I'd forgotten all about the wretched kid. All it would take was a casually dropped pill in the old politician's drink. And what about Christopher Miracle? I snarled. What had he done to hurt you? Fetch smiled.
Oh, Mr. Box, you have been naive. Don't you see, even now? Oh, well.
He crossed over to Christmas and patted him on the head.
It is rather fitting that you, my father's greatest enemy, should be here to witness his final triumph, because, you see, I am not merely my father's son. I am Arcala.
I sighed, feigning boredom. Actually, I wanted to ask you about that. Taking over an entire youth movement, all those raffles and sack races, seems a very roundabout way of getting to Lord Battenberg. Fetch Jr. and Melissa Forethought looked at each other in what seemed like silent amusement.
I fear I must leave you now, he said. I have an appointment of my own to attend to. Enjoy the show.
And he was gone from the room. What does he mean? I demanded. Enjoy the show.
Tell him, Christmas,
said Melissa Forethought. The sole inheritor of my family name gazed at me calmly.
Lord Battenberg is going to make a speech, he began, and Arcala is going to present him with a special award from the new Scout movement. Isn't that right, miss?
Miss Forethought purred her approval.
That's right, sweetheart. Arcala is going to raise a toast to his lordship, one that will be witnessed by millions of people all across the world, millions of parents and children, all gathered to drink to the health of Lord Battenberg.
I was obviously missing something crucial.
Now, please be quiet whilst I switch on the television.
After a moment, a bluey image of the domed chamber appeared on the screen. I saw the Jamaican delegate banging his gavel. The chattering fell silent, and Lord Battenberg, beaming and benevolent, walked to the dais. The applause was fulsome and sincere. Even the Russians managed to smile.
My friends, colleagues, distinguished guests, he began, gripping his lapels. It is with great pride and humility that I welcome you here to Jamaica for this inaugural World Government Summit. Now we're all here, I hope we can create a lasting framework for global peace, a fresh start under the Caribbean sun.
A torrent of applause from the delegates.
But you will forgive me, I hope, a little indulgence, Battenberg went on. For some time, I've kept a project very close to my heart, the new scouting movement, a movement which has done so much to succour and inspire our young people. They have even made me their honorary president.
Laughter from the audience. Beside me, Miss Forethought seemed enraptured. On the screen, Fetch Jr. was suddenly standing close by, ready to join Battenberg on the platform. Battenberg himself, like some idiot choir master, began to intone the scout oath. "On my honour, I will do my best." And then the tiniest hint of deliverance. I'd spotted something nestling in the turn-up of my trouser leg, something small and chestnut brown. A woggle. It must belong to one of the scouts I'd disabled in the car. It seemed insane, but it was the only weapon I had. "To keep myself physically strong," continued Battenberg, "mentally awake and morally straight." Now Melissa Forethought was joining in with the oath. "A scout looks on the bright side of things," she cried. "He cheerfully does tasks that come his way." Jubilant in the midst of her ranting, she inadvertently lowered the nose of the revolver and took her eyes off me. I crossed my leg and snatched the woggle from my turn-up, desperately calculated the angle and flicked it as hard as I could towards Forethought's ecstatic face. The woggle sailed through the air and disappeared between her gaping lips, falling into her gullet with a satisfying plop. She clutched at her throat, and the magnum clattered to the floor. She gestured helplessly towards me, but I declined to assist. I grabbed Christmas tightly by the wrist and dashed out onto the gantry. Far below, Lord Battenberg stepped back from the microphone, and the sickly form of Fetch Jr. took his place. The bank of television screens had all lit up. Each showed different scout huts, from Rangoon to Ramsgate, Tripoli to Timbuktu, an excited crowd of children and parents, all poised with glasses in their hands. Fetch's icy tones rang out across the room. "Scouts of all nations," he cried, "I invite you to raise your glasses and toast our beloved patron. I give you Lord Battenberg." And suddenly I understood the missing link in this tangled skein. Images flashed through my brain. A rainy churchyard, and a rather tacky floral display, arranged to resemble a large bottle of fruit cordial, with a large letter M emblazoned on its front. "Christopher Miracle!" I ejaculated. Now it made sense. The hostile takeover of his firm. Acronym needed the company because... "Every single cup of orange squash," I whispered in awe, "in every single scout hut is laced with black butterfly." I shook my head in horror. Acronym didn't intend to kill Lord Battenberg. They were going to make him stand and watch as they poisoned half the world. "Stop it!" I yelled. "Stop the broadcast!" There was immediate consternation below, and hundreds of faces turned up towards me. Playfair recognized immediately the old man in the black suit. "Box!" he shouted. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" "This whole thing is a setup," I cried. "The orange squash in all those scout huts is laced with black butterfly. It will send millions of people off their heads, create worldwide panic." I turned to address Battenberg himself. "The world is watching, your lordship. Tell them to throw away their drinks, I implore you." Lord Battenberg looked baffled. Then he turned back to the cameras. Please forgive this bizarre interruption, my friends. Now, he looked down at Fetch Jr., who was simpering up at him. Perhaps you would be so kind as to make the toast again." "It would be my pleasure," hissed the miniature horror. And then suddenly one of the scout bodyguard broke ranks. Although he looked pretty much identical to his fellows, there was no mistaking the sleek, athletic grace with which he bounded onto the platform. Kingdom come. With all round him frozen in shock, he neatly rugby-tackled Lord Battenberg, flattening him onto the dais. "No!" squealed Fetch. The ugly little fellow hurled himself at Kingdom Come, got him by the neck, and the two of them rolled onto the floor. A direct attack on Lord Battenberg was something Alan Playfair had, of course, been waiting for. His MI6 men sprang into action and raced towards Kingdom Come. But the boy from the CIA managed to throw off Fetch Jr., and, eyes glinting, he confronted the service chief. "It's true, Playfair," he gasped. "Mr. Box was right. You have to believe him." Fetch wriggled to his feet and snapped his fingers. Abandoning all pretense, the scouts now went for Playfair's men with a vengeance. Soon the chamber was a blur of fists and boots. Leaving Christmas behind, I stumbled down the steel stairs from the gantry. I threw a glance at the banks of television screens. Bewildered children and worried adults intently watched the carnage unfolding before them. But crucially, not one of them seemed to have raised their cup of orange squash to their lips. I turned my attention back to the dais. "Fetch!" I called. "Give it up!" The mini-man snapped round towards me, eyes blazing with an almost inhuman loathing. Then, with a shriek, he was on me. He was appallingly strong. I gasped and gulped and wheezed as the nimble little fingers squeezed at my gullet.
"Now, old man, you're going to die," he swore. "Die for what you have done."
My head began to swim, and I scrabbled desperately at the creature's shirt. At once my sweating fingers found his nipples, and I plunged my fingernails into them with all my strength. With a howl of pain, he let go of my neck and flopped to the floor, cupping his tiny palms over the damaged areas. I rubbed at my neck and staggered slightly, and then he came at me again, this time brandishing a huge shard of broken glass from one of the smashed television screens. Lungs bursting, I turned and staggered back up the stairs I had only just descended. My little son stood at the top, staring at me with his dark eyes. We were both now on the gantry, some 30 feet in the air. "Go back into the room, Christmas. Get out of the way." I made to push him back into the viewing room, but then his eyes widened and I swung round to see Fetch right behind me. He jabbed the lethal glass at me, and the shard caught my thigh. I yelled in agony.
"Years I've planned this. Years!"
spat the hideous piglet.
"And you presume to undo all my work in a matter of minutes?"
With that, Fetch shot like a torpedo towards me, but I stuck out my wounded leg, and his momentum carried him neatly over the steel banister. The little uniform body spiraled down. I held onto the banister for I don't know how long, my head spinning, letting the breath seep slowly into my exhausted frame. At last, I felt a pressure on my hand and glanced wearily down to find Christmas staring up at me.
"Daddy," he whimpered, "I'm sorry. Will you forgive me?"
"No, I bloody well won't, you vindictive little bugger." I cracked him across the backside, and tears welled in his eyes. "Now, get down those stairs." By the time we stumbled down to the floor, it was all over. The few remaining scouts stood huddled, leaderless, and pathetic, rounded up by Playfair's squad. The head of the newly combined MI6 and Royal Academy looked rather ill, blinking at the utter chaos that surrounded him. Box, oh, love," he stammered. What can I say?" I nodded. "Dear me, Alan, what a mess." I glanced down at my watch. "Oh, for shame. I'm retired. Looks like it's all yours." I limped towards Kingdom Come, who was supervising the restraint of the errant scouts. "Hey," he said gently. "You okay?" I nodded. "You believed me?" "Sure, baby," he grinned. "Eventually. I knew there was something weird about those blonde goons in the hospital. Besides, like I told you, I respect tradition. You were the best. You still are." I managed an exhausted chuckle, then winced as the pain in my leg flared again. Kingdom dropped to his knees, and his long, slim hands were soon all over my thigh. "I'm going to need a little rest and recuperation," I said at last. "Care to join me?" Kingdom giggled his sing-song giggle. "Sure, baby. If you promise not to behave." I held up my hand. Scout's honor.